So number 18 about genetics, we kind of did this in the extinction lecture. Some of you already saw this on Wednesday, maybe Thursday. But I'm going to assume that nobody has seen this and we'll just restart. You call the handyman, say, yeah, I need you to fix something, just come on over, I'll show you when you get here. Handyman shows up and says, check it out, I've got this van full of tools, I don't even know what your job is, but look at me, I came prepared. In a different scenario, you say, yo, handyman, come over, I'll show you when you get here. Handyman shows up and says, I have hammer, what is your problem? Which handyman do you have the most faith in? Who's going to be better off to fix your problems? Because you got more tools, they're ready for more problems, right? There's a reason I mentioned that obvious, stupid visual. Genetic diversity is like a toolbox, and genes are like tools. A population with more genes can handle more changes in the environment because they have more variation to select from and survive changes in that environment. You see, imagine in the future there's a new predator and humans need to hide in caves. All you little people will be fine and humanity will survive. Imagine another future that the only food available is high up in trees and all you tall humans will survive and humanity will also be fine. Short or tall doesn't really matter today, but that genetic diversity is valuable in the future because things could change where we need variation to select from. Does that make sense to everybody? This is the value of genetic diversity. It's like having a bunch of tools. You might not need it today, but who knows? Someday that tool might come in handy. Now please look up. This is a horrible drawing because I used all these multicolored markers. See, I have all these different colors. And then when I put them on the board, they look like two colors. So take my word for it. I use light blue, dark blue, pinkish purple, pink, purple, brown, orange, and red, and green. Okay. Maybe you can see that. Maybe you just take my word for it. Please look up. Population size is the black line. Colors are genetic diversity. Catch this. Over time, population shrinks. So the only ones that get to breed are those two. All of their descendants will only have those genes to draw from. So, even if population recovers, genetic diversity does not. This is called a genetic bottleneck because it's shaped like the neck of a bottle. Population reduction, or sorry, extreme population reduction results in limited genetic diversity of their descendants. Even if population recovers, diversity does not. Apparently this happened in cheetahs. I don't know what's up. But somebody did a genetic analysis of cheetahs, and it looks like cheetahs are very, very, very closely related. Thank you. Please pass this back. Today, all the cheetahs on the planet are like this. They're really genetically similar. They're like closer together than cousins. They're like really, 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 really genetically similar. And so what we assume happened is sometime in history, cheetahs got down to just a few. Then their population has recovered because, you know, like breeding and numbers, but they're all pretty much inbred, you would say. And having low genetic diversity sucks, because cheetahs are pretty much doomed. They only have the genes to do what they're doing right now. If anything changes in the environment, there's not a lot of variety to draw from. So a disease that kills one cheetah will probably kill all the cheetahs. Or an extreme temperature event that kills one of the cheetahs will probably kill all the cheetahs because they're pretty darn close to clones of each other. You might know that there's a thing called the settler effect, where a few individuals of a species move to a new habitat, and all of the descendants are pretty different from that original population because they only share the traits of the settlers. Like Europe had all sorts of genes, but the Pilgrims were a pretty small subset of Europe. So American descendants just share those genes of that first round of Pilgrims more than the total diversity of Europe, because not all of Europe came over. Settler effect, and bottleneck, diversity, descendants, ancestors, questions? Genetic bottleneck? Genetic risk? Genetic diversity? Vocabs, those were, are there any questions about that? Then quickly, I'd like to tell you the story of the grizzly bear. Everybody knows a grizzly bear, right? Big, like, big bear, brown. There used to be grizzly bears all over the western United States, including Santa Barbara, by the way. Apparently, when Spaniards came up to Santa Barbara to build the mission system, the first scouting party wanted to have the mission in Montecito. They were like, oh, there's like creeks and like nice shady trees and plenty of fresh water and huge salmons everywhere. But you know, trees and creeks and salmons means grizzly bears. So that first scouting party didn't make it back to the Spanish colony that became Mexico. So they sent a second scouting party. The second scouting party finds these books that are like, oh yes, we should settle here, last entry. And so they're like, wow, this looks like a really nice place. I wonder what happened to Jim and Bob, but I guess we should probably just do this because like, they thought this would be nice too. One person limps back to Spain/Mexico and says, bro, it looks really good up there. But then all the homies got eaten by grizzly bears, so don't do it. So the Spanish had to set up camp in Santa Barbara because it was like the only place that didn't have hella grizzly bears. And so we were forced to manage our water differently. That's why the Santa Barbara mission has an aqueduct, which was coincidentally not built by the missionaries themselves. Okay. Grizzly bears. Used to be all over the place. We started to develop the West, and we had some second thoughts and said, well, let's just not develop Yellowstone, because Yellowstone's really sweet. It's pretty tough to be a grizzly bear in a logging camp, and it's tough to be a grizzly bear on a sheep ranch, and it's tough to be a grizzly bear in a city. It's tough to be a grizzly bear in the middle of a freeway. You can't really be a grizzly bear on a farm, but Yellowstone is sweet for grizzly bears. So we said, here you go, grizzly bears. You can keep Yellowstone. It's awesome. You'll love it. But obviously, the federal government can't protect everything. And so today, please look up, Yellowstone is surrounded by different land uses. You could say that Yellowstone is like an island, ecologically speaking. In other words, it's a vocab term, ecological island, because it's one biotype surrounded by different biotypes. That's a man-made ecological island, because we've changed all of the surrounding forest into ranches and farms and tree lots and cities and whatnot. You understand my point, ecological island? So the grizzly bears inside of Yellowstone, they're stoked. They're like, hooray! Nobody shoots me here. I got plenty of food here. They're doing great. But they got just one problem. They're pretty much like dating their sister. Genetically speaking, grizzly bears in Yellowstone are like this. By setting up an ecological island, we just said, okay, you 4 grizzly bears, you're the future of grizzlies. And they're like, yeah, but we don't have any short ones or any tall ones or any skinny ones or any heavy ones. We just have like Jim and Bob and my sister and me. And so those grizzly bears are pretty inbred, they have very limited diversity, and now we say that they're a genetic risk. Because we've put them into an ecological island, they are genetically distinct from other grizzly bears. They're quickly differentiating. Ask me. Genetic diversity, ecological islands, assignment 3.2 anywhere? Yeah?
Well, so like I know with the mammoths that got to the Channel Islands, was a similar thing happening with them?
Well, you can assume first of all that they were sort of inbred because they were a smaller population of mammoth. Separately, evolution on islands is really interesting because there's not enough productivity to support a full food web. So a lot of times in the absence of competitors or predators, species size changes dramatically. It's called island dwarfism or island gigantism. But it's also true that many species don't reach that critical population size to maintain their diversity. So island subspecies are usually considered to be genetically fragile because they're very, very, very similar to their peers. There's not enough land to support a large population, especially of bigger stuff like a mammoth. I would assume that they were pretty inbred.
Okay.
Genetically speaking, they were probably doomed anyway. Are there any other questions about assignment 3.2? And by the way, I'm not an expert. I'm just this was my hunch. Any questions on assignment 3.2? Last call. Vocab on 3.3. Shuffle your papers. Check now. Vocab on 3.3. If you ask me, I can tell you. No vocab on 3.3.
Functional extinction
is when there are still individuals, but they don't have a future. I went to Lotus Land, and they're like, you see that plant? It's extinct. And I'm like, bro, I'm looking at 3 of them right now. How can it be extinct? And the lady's like, well, they are extinct. And I'm like, and she's like, yeah, but they're all girls. This is a sexual, there's a
Disparity.
monocot. So they're either boys or girls without any boys around. Those 3 are functionally extinct because the species is going nowhere. You might still have an individual, but it has no future because there are the opposite gender to make more. And so opposite sex to make more. So there's like a rhinoceros, but there's like 3 individuals left, but they're all boys. So they're extinct. There's 3 left, but they're not going to have any offspring. They're functionally extinct. Anybody else? Yeah.
Optimum sustainable population.
So that's the number where, that's like the sweet spot for maintaining the size of a population. So like, if you keep deer at their optimum sustainable population, you can keep hunting up until that point. If they get any more, then sickness becomes a problem, and so you can't let the population get higher than that. And you don't want it to get lower than that, because then there's not enough to repopulate. So we regulate most of our commercial harvest species by trying to keep them at the optimum, where there's enough to keep giving you a steady yield, but not so many that they have overpopulation problems, overshoot problems, like disease or crowding. Other vocabs?
Punctuated extinction?
Those are the mass extinction events. This came up in my lecture. Punctuated extinction are the big mass extinction events.
That's not punctuated equilibrium.
Punctuated equilibrium is this pattern you see in the history of life. The pattern is there are surges of speciation called punctuated speciation events. Like the mammals surged to fill all the niches that were left open by the punctuated extinction, which was the die-off of the dinosaurs. Equilibrium is there was pretty much as many dinosaur species as there are mammal species. So you've got roughly the same niches. You can subdivide an ecosystem into only so many little pieces. When you clear a whole bunch of those niches with a big extinction event, then the survivors will radiate to fill those in punctuated speciation. The pattern is called punctuated equilibrium. Questions, 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 questions? I've got to talk about a little bit of vocabulary in 3.3. We're going to go do a tour of ecological restoration at UCSB. Ecological restoration is when you try to fix up an environment that was previously damaged. So like Anna Hebb cuts down a big forest to make a farm. When she's getting old and she doesn't want to be a farmer anymore, she gives it back to the state and says, hey, you can have this. And the state says, well, we don't need a farm, but maybe we'll spend a few bucks to make it back into a forest. That's an ecological restoration project. The environments that we most like to restore are wetlands because they're so ecologically critical. So on our field trip, we're going to see a whole bunch of ecological restoration projects. There's a lot of debate about how you restore. Study goal number 38. Oh man, did I not have this somewhere? Oh no. I thought I had this question in your study goal somewhere. Let me look real quick. Man, this is my new unit. It shows. Oh yeah, there we go. Number 27. It's kind of tricky when you're running a restoration project to figure out what your restoration target is. Like, are we just trying to do this to like keep this thing alive? Do we just want to like give up on keeping it alive in nature and just keep one alive in a cage somewhere? Should we just preserve the genetics and hope that someday later this will work out? Or do we want to try to get like the native populations all back to perfect natural glory? Restoration projects usually aim for this. We try to make sure that the soils are all healthy and normal. We try to start with some of the more generalist species. And usually as we see the specialists moving in, we stop interfering and let the rest of the complexity recover on its own. We're going to go to a place where a whole bunch of wetlands were developed and see how they're coming back after humans have gone to plant that stuff. I'll talk about that more when we get there. But there's a special type of restoration project. You saw this vocab term in the reading packet. In question number 40, which is assignment 3.4, I'd like to talk about mitigation. Mitigation is when you restore damaged habitat in exchange for damaging some habitat yourself. As an example, the airport needed to extend its runway. And in order to extend the runway, they were forced to damage a little bit of a creek. They're like, sorry guys, we gotta extend the runway because, you know, business and safety and airplanes and landing speeds, and we don't want them to go off the end of the track, and we can't bring in the big planes, and we need the tourism. So we just need to extend the runway a little bit, and we're gonna mess up like a little bit, like 2 acres of that creek. And the state says, well, you can't mess up the creek, we need creek. And the airport says, well, what about if I fix up a bunch of other wetlands? That's called mitigation, where they repaired acres over here in exchange for damaging some acres over here. You do some good restoration project in exchange for having caused some damage. There's one problem. Which do you think will be more ecologically valuable? What's more important for ecosystems? The native wetland that you had to bulldoze, or the artificial man-made wetland that probably doesn't have the same ecological complexity? The native one's more valuable, right? So here's what the state says. For every 1 acre of native habitat you're going to damage, you got to give us 4 acres of restored wetland. Vocab term, this is called mitigation ratio. Because the native habitat is much more valuable than the man-made artificial version. When you're going to trade a mitigation project, we usually go 3-to-1 or 4-to-1, artificial to native. What?
So the native is better than the artificial?
The native is much better than the one that's man-made. Do you have a tan line on your neck? Yeah.
No. It's in the
Weird.
necklace.
Okay, got it. Number 19, I'd like to talk about a little bit too. I've got an excellent condor story for you. There's this bird called the California condor. Funny little detail, it was pretty much going to go extinct no matter what humans did. But maybe you've heard that humans pushed the California condor right to the brink of extinction. How many of you are aware of this? California condor is pretty much a leftover of the Pleistocene. It didn't really stand a chance before humans showed up. But anyway, modern civilization really hammered the condors. Their habitat got divided into little tiny pieces, and they like peace and quiet, so whenever there's people around, they go further and further away, and they pretty much got isolated to a few little mountaintops. Problem number 1, their habitat got fragmented. Problem number 2, they eat dead big animals. There's just not a lot of dead big animals around. Usually humans take those dead big animals or populations of big animals in general are all in decline from other human activities. So problem number 2, they've been running out of their food supply. Problem number 3, when you find a dead big animal in the backcountry, it's very likely to have a bunch of lead in it, and lead's toxic, because hunters use lead and eventually sometimes lose an animal. So problem number 3, we poisoned California condors with lead ammunition in their dead animal diet. And finally, problem number 4, they like to sun themselves high up in trees, but up in the high mountains they rarely find big trees. What they do find is power poles. California condors have a really big wingspan, and when they set out in the sun, they start to relax, and they chill, and they get really sleepy. And if their wings touch 2 parallel power lines, you all realize that those are uninsulated. They go poof, and they explode. And you get flash fried condor jerky bits. So the poor California condor is going extinct, and at some point, some hippie's like, wait, we're down to like 150 of these things, we gotta save them. So we trapped all the wild condors, and for like a decade there wasn't a single condor in the wild, not in California. And we took them all down to San Diego, and it took a while to figure this out, but eventually we figured out what to feed them, we figured out how to get them in the mood, we figured out how to incubate their eggs, how to hatch the hatchlings, how to get them to eat without imprinting on humans, because in California Condor Release 1.0, we released all these condors that had been hand-fed by people, and they were like, it sucks out here, and they all flew to like suburban neighborhoods and like walked up to people like, ha ha, feed me. So Suburban Release 1.0 didn't work out. The Condor Release 1.0 didn't work out. Eventually we figured out how to feed them with like a mitt that looks like a condor behind a cage, so they didn't realize it was a human, you know? And then we like trained people to scare them, so they'd be afraid of people and stay in the mountains. And we got it all to work, and it cost like $100 gazillion. You can quote me on that. It's exactly 100 gazillion. It was a lot of money. And we go to California Condor Release 2.0, like 30 years later, and we reintroduced the California condor to the wild. And you know what happened? They all friggin' died. You know why? They didn't have enough habitat. There's no big dead animals for them to eat. Whenever they found it, it was full of lead. And whenever they were setting themselves on power poles, they electrocuted themselves. Because you realize we managed the species numbers, but we didn't manage their ecosystem, so they just had the same stupid problems. So number 19, we don't do single species management very much. Now what we do is called ecosystem management. If you make a healthy system, most of the pieces of that puzzle will usually populate fine. If we just fix up a couple parts of the condor's range, the remaining condors will make plenty of babies and have a successful growth in population. And we still care about the California condor. We still want California condors to live in California, but we don't just breed extra condors and put them back into the same stupid blender. Now we manage their ecosystem, not the species itself, but its system. That's why we do ecosystem restoration. Because with a healthy system, the species come back on their own. Rather than try to nitpick which is the sickest population and try to bring them back through very intrusive, expensive, complicated captive breeding, we just manage the system, make sure all the plants are there, then the bugs will probably show up, and then the birds will show up, and then the predators will show up, and it's back to good. So number 19, we've evolved. We now, as a management strategy, we do ecosystem management. 21, 22, 23 we did in class. We added a lot of notes. 24, 25 ecological island we talked about. 26, 27, 28. Hey, please ask me anything you want about assignment 3.3. Study goals is fine. If you have notes, I'm solid, but please check your notes. Make sure what you need to ask me about assignment 3.3. Ask me, ask me, ask me.
In number 23, it said there was like a little asterisk that said we would add notes in class.
So that was our lecture on Wednesday, Thursday. Did you come to see one of those?
Yeah.
If you came to see one of those, you're fine. Everybody who couldn't make it to Wednesday or Thursday, since my video failed, I will have to make a set of notes that I can distribute to all of you. I just found out today that it failed, so I'll try to have those notes ready by Tuesday. Our first day back in the classroom. Yeah?
For 24, it says that sea lions and mountain lions are, well, it doesn't say that, but sea lions and mountain lions are too abundant. What causes a species to be too abundant?
Well, usually some disruption in the food chain, like you get rid of their competitors or their predators. So first of all, I dispute that mountain lions are too abundant. I'm actually more convinced by people who say that they're still rare. Problem is they're scary and they eat our babies, so they get a lot of attention, so we kind of freak out about their population size. But in some places they are too abundant. Like up in the Sierra, they're actually pretty abundant. But the sea lions are a really good example. We removed all the stuff that eats sea lions.
It is, because of the
Okay,
type
so now there's nothing to control their population, but they still have plenty of access to their main food supplies, small frozen fish. So it probably is true that by removing predator pressure, that population is expanded.
Wait, is that Jose? Is the pep rally right now?
Yes. For some kids, you're supposed to go to your period 4, and then the teacher will tell you when you go to this.
Goodbye, banana. Sorry.
It's okay. All right, later. Will you let me know if your mama can make it?
She can.
Sorry, I was talking to her, but thank you for letting me know that. Yeah, will you let me know if your mama can make it?
Yeah. I'll text you.